They were like, they got rations for 3 years, so we're gonna wait for more. Hi, my name is Dina Marhendl. I'm a doctoral researcher at Leipzig University, and I do videos about research in the Arctic with a focus on clouds and snow, and also on research campaigns. However, today I thought I'd do something different. So since it's spooky month, I thought it might be interesting to talk about the history of Arctic exploration, since that's quite filled with some gruesome, more or less horror stories. Humans have been fascinated by the far, far north for centuries, and I get it. I guess that's half of my personality. I mean, it's almost mandatory for someone doing their PhD in Arctic research. However, conducting research in the Arctic today in a mostly safe environment for a limited period of time is something completely different than the dangers that early researchers experienced on their quest. To appreciate what we know about the Arctic today, let's dive into the history, but first a couple of disclaimers. So I was aiming for a kind of mixture between informative content, so these are research stories, and entertainment. So because we're approaching Halloween, I picked rather misfortunate stories with bad endings. However, that's quite common with Arctic exploration, especially in the early days. Also, very, very important, using terms like explore or discover are not the best to use. We need to reckon that the Arctic has been home for indigenous populations for thousands of years. I picked 3 stories about 3 explorations or explorers. These were all Western men, because I remember them from lectures or seminar talks, and I could easily find sources there. One more thing, I also picked them because they have some kind of link to meteorology or atmospheric research. Alright, but let's dive in. One of the main motivations to explore the Arctic in the 16th century and then onwards was finding and mapping possible trading routes between North America, Europe and Asia, so kind of profit-based reasons. The hope was to find quicker routes for trading, and finding such a passage was also the main motivation for the, I guess, protagonist of our first story when he set up for his 3rd and final Arctic exploration. John Franklin was a polar researcher and admiral in the British Navy. He already made overland journeys in the Arctic, from Hudson Bay to the Arctic in 1890 to 1822 and 1825 to 1827. He was accompanied there by a bunch of scientists. During his first journey, so 1890 to 1822, 11 out of his 20-person crew died. They died due to starvation or exhaustion. The survivors had to resort to eating lichen, and they even tried to eat their own leather boots, which gave Franklin the nickname the man who ate his boots. I know, very, very creative. They were then rescued after being stranded in the ice by members of the Yellowskin Nation, an indigenous group of people living in Canada, or what is Canada now. And now, after the fact, it was said that poor planning on Franklin's side and the failure to adapt were reasons why this first expedition ended in such a bad manner with this high number of death count. However, back in Britain, Franklin was received as a hero, so him having to be saved was kind of brushed under the carpet. Regarding scientific findings, he and researchers discovered coal deposits and also some limestone fossilized, which indicated warmer past climates. And that already caused quite a controversy, since at that time, so mid-19th century, discussions about climate change already started. Then in 1845, Franklin set out for his third and final mission, and this time by ship. The hope was to find the Northwest Passage, so linking the Atlantic and the Pacific. They set out with 2 ships called Erebus and Terror. I wonder why, because it does not seem very motivating for the crew to be on a ship called Terror, but maybe old warships, I don't know, I might have looked it up and put it here. Also, whether in their kind of teenage goth phase, Erebus for darkness, maybe keep it more consistent, darkness and terror, or just go for Phobos and Deimos, maybe that was taken already, never mind. And Erebus was commanded by a guy called James Fitzjames, which I only mention because I found the name quite funny. So the goal was to find this Northwest Passage. However, they never emerged on the Pacific side. So after 2 years, Franklin's wife tried to persuade the British Navy admirals to send rescue missions. However, they were like, they got rations for 3 years, so we're gonna wait one more. And then in 1848, the first of many search missions started. Finally, during these missions, grave sites and some relics were found on Beechey Island, which then gave kind of hints to the unfortunate outcome of the mission. So they found evidence that they had to overwinter there between 1845 and 1846. One person who accompanied these rescue missions was a doctor called Dr. John Ray, and he, while talking to indigenous people, got told that yes, the Franklin crew got shipbound there in the ice, had to overwinter, and did not make it out. He also heard stories about cannibalism, so that they had to resort to eat members of their crew who perished. However, that was a very, very outrageous thought in the Victorian British society, such that when reports of that doctor were leaked to the public, he was shunned and vilified. More or less modern studies, so from the end of 20th century and onwards, indicate that the man likely died of a mixture of exhaustion, starvation, scurvy, botulism, and lead poisoning. The latter, interestingly, because canned foods were oftentimes sealed with seal containing lead, and that might have led to lead poisoning from the food or even from the water deposits. So, thanks to Franklin's wife, Lady Franklin, over 25 search missions were sent out. However, none were successful in discovering the remains of Franklin and bringing him back, so he remains undiscovered to this day. The name Franklin seems to be particularly cursed when it comes to these early Arctic explorations, and so our next story is about the unfortunate outcome of the Lady Franklin Bay expedition, which was undertaken in 1881 to 1884 and led by a US lieutenant called Adolphus Greely. As the name suggests, this exploration led them to the Lady Franklin Bay, which was indeed named after Franklin's wife. Goal of the mission was to establish an meteorological observation site there, which was part of the first ever International Polar Year. We can talk about International Polar Years in another video if you're interested. However, the scientific feats during this first International Polar Year were kind of overshadowed by the tragic outcome of the exploration. However, 2 members managed to set a new record furthest far north. In total, only 7 out of 25 men who set out survived. That was because during the first year, so in the summer of 1881, they set out to Lady Franklin Bay via ship, got dropped off there, and the ship left again. And this was a particularly warm summer, which they did not know. So the kind of danger on getting a ship there the following years was very much underestimated. Next year was planned that a ship with supplies should arrive at them, so in 1882. However, due to bad weather and the ice, the ship never made it there. Similar, the year after, 1883, another attempt to reach them via ship was unsuccessful. So, probably starving already, Greely and his crew decided to head south to try to reach station with supplies. However, winter came faster than expected and they had to set up camp at a spot. Finally, in 1884, a rescue mission found them and they were able to save 7 men out of the 25, including Greely himself. Again, after corpses had also been taken back to give them proper burials, they found some indications for cannibalism, so chunks of meat were gone. As far as I read, the survivors very heavily denied those accusations. However, it seems like they were like, oh yes, we cut up some meat, but we did not eat that. We used that as bait to hunt sea lice, which we then could eat. So, kind of cannibalism in 2 steps. All right. And the last story is about a man I already mentioned in my video about my time in New Orleans. You can find the link up here. That's Ronald Amerson. He was a Norwegian polar scientist and explorer, and he was successful in what Franklin failed to do. So in 1903, he was the first one to successfully traverse the Northwest Passage. Wanted to include him here due to his presence in New Orleans, so there's even this statue. I think I got a picture. That's because he used New Orleans as a base for his explorations further north via airship. He was possibly the first one to reach the North Pole via airship, and possibly because there's, I think, 3 other people claiming that they reached the North Pole first. These claims were also the reason why Amundsen then set his focus on the south, so he went to Antarctica and was, if the previous claims they reached the North Pole are false, because they are not verified, Amundsen was the first one to reach both North and South Pole, together with Oscar Whistling. The South Pole he reached during an expedition on foot in 1911, and the North Pole via airship in 1926. However, as successful as Amundsen was in his previous missions, trying to save others was what ultimately brought his downfall, quite literally. So in 1928, he set out on a rescue mission in the Arctic via plane. They were looking for missing members of another expedition whose airship crashed. And Amundsen never returned, so it was assumed that his plane, together with members that joined him, crashed and sunk into the Barents Sea. A bunch of rescue attempts, or at least trying to find the remains of the planes, were conducted even as late as 2004 and 2009. However, none were successful, so remains of his plane and remains of Amundsen remain undiscovered to this day. To conclude, I find it very fascinating how these early explorers risk their lives, oftentimes also risk the lives of their crew, just to say, oh yeah, first, I respect the advances that these early researchers have brought and the knowledge that we know today. However, at the same time, I can only shake my head when reading about stories like Franklin setting out very much underprepared, having to be rescued, losing men, and then laterwards being celebrated as a hero. Anyhow, I very much hope you enjoyed this video. I know it was a bit different. If you did, leave a like or a comment. Next video will be then more science-based, now that the temperatures are getting much colder here in Germany. I think it might be appropriate to talk about one of my absolute favorite topics, about snowflakes and ice crystals. So subscribe to not miss out on that. Anyhow, stay safe, have a great rest of the day, and hopefully see you soon. Bye bye!